We're going to start off with a bunch of short stories by Charles Chestnut. Tales of Conjure and the Color Line. They're at different points. Is a story called The Wife of His. The short story is about a gentleman who escaped from slavery, during which time him and his wife, his slave wife, were split up. And so this gentleman moves to the north after not being able to find his wife, becomes a little bit more successful, and joins a group called the Blue Vein Club. And if you're not sure of what that is, the Blue Veins were a group of people whose skin was so light that they could pass potentially as white. And so they were called the Blue Veins because you could see their veins. And it's just an interesting story that kind of looks at what it means to be black or African American after the Civil War, and what roles do those that have African Americans that have kind of escaped that point in life of slavery and have kind of solidified themselves in the upper or the next social class, and what role or responsibility do they have to those who are still in the social class? How do they interact with them? What relationship should they still have? And then how do they deal with their past? So it's a very interesting story about Mr. Ryder and his wife. So definitely suggest that. And Charles Chestnut just has some great short stories. The next book that I'm going to talk about is a book called Copper Sun by Sharon Draper. I could not find my copy of this book. I'm hoping that it's just in storage and that I did not lose it in the flood a few years ago. But it's about a young girl who is in Africa, and her village is attacked by slave traders, and she is then captured, taken, sold into slavery in the Carolinas, and then she lives on the plantation. She befriends an indentured servant, and then they escape the plantation and travel to Florida. And it's all about her experiences and how in her life. So it was a really good book, and I definitely recommend anyone, any students should read that. The next book I have is called Maleka's Winter Carnival. And I thought this was a really interesting story just because the kind of a bunch of different perspectives. So the story is that a mom who moved to Canada, I'm assuming because it doesn't really say that in the beginning, but she comes back to see her daughter. When she comes back with this French-Canadian guy and his daughter. The mom and the dad get married, and so then Maleka moves with the dad and her mom and the daughter, her new sister, back to Canada. And so it's just her experiences there. Although she speaks English, it's a Creole form of English, so she doesn't always get understood, and it's really kind of hard for her. And then they have the carnival in Canada, but obviously it's winter time, and so then the carnival that they experience is totally different than the carnival she had, and just the struggles that she has with that new experience. It's a short book, but it's kind of fun, and there's some good pictures in here. So and so it just shows kind of, just to give you an idea. So this is them in the carnival and how it is. And so she's in the snow and she's all bundled up, looking like the kid from A Christmas Story. But it was a good book, and so I liked it. The next book I want to talk about is I Am Rosa Parks. And this is a series, or from the series of Ordinary People Change the World. And it tells the story of Rosa Parks, but it tells it kind of through the eyes of a child. So even when Rosa Parks is 40, and she's on the bus, and it just talks about the whole story and what it was like for her, and some of the discrimination she faced as a child, and what prepared her to withstand the drivers on the bus. And it kind of gets rid of some of the stereotypes, like people think, oh, she was in the front of the bus, or she was in the very first seat. Reality is she was in the very first row of the colored seats, and so she was asked to move from those, and she refuses. But it's still her looking like a child, and so just a really good story. Tells a lot of things, and yeah, it was a great story of Rosa Parks, I thought. So that was good. The next, which is probably the most interesting, is called Akata Witch. And so this is the story of a West African girl who grows up and is born in New York City and grows up there but she is albino. And so she discovers that she has magical powers, and she meets up with some other kids, and together they are sought after by the government organization to capture this other witch who's a lifetime criminal, does a bunch of bad things, and it's just the story of her trying to catch them. But I just thought that the main character, an albino West African girl, was just was really cool, and a different thing. So wanted to bring that to your attention. Next thing I want to talk about is A Framework for Understanding Poverty by Ruby Payne. I'm sure some of you have heard of this book, but for me, it was a great book to kind of look at the different perspectives that people have coming out of poverty, and not just like African Americans or like minorities, but just anybody in poverty, and how that experience can kind of impact their perspective and what they value. And so I thought that was a really good book and wanted to bring that up. The next book I want to talk about is Free to Be You and Me. And this book is just a really cool book that just looks at norms, gender norms, racial norms, and just what it means to be a person. So it starts off with a poem, and then there's this story, boy meets a girl, and it just kind of them discussing gender norms and gender stereotypes, and then eventually the one thinks that they're a boy and the other thinks that they're a girl, and then they get their diapers changed, and they realize that it was not true, that the girl that thought she was a boy is actually a girl, and the boy that thought he was a girl is actually a boy. And then, just stories like When You Grow Up. It's just a bunch of cute little stories that also address, norms and stereotypes. Ladies First is a great story because she eventually gets the first one eaten by a tiger because she says ladies first. And it's just, great way to address just stereotypes and what it means. So I thought that was a really good read. There's a bunch of short stories that are really fun. The Old Woman We Lived In, So just a bunch of short stories. So definitely recommend this because it's just a fun book. There's actually a DVD. The library version doesn't have it. But it's read by a bunch of celebrities that tell the stories, and it's just a fun listen. The last book I have is a book called Lan Po. And this is actually the story of Little Red Riding Hood, but from China. And it varies a little bit in the story, but also in the characters. So the characters are three Chinese kids, Shang, Tao, and Shang, Chao, and Peng, I think. But anyway, so mom goes to see Popo, who is grandma, and then when mom leaves, the wolf comes and says that the wolf is Popo, and the kids realize, after inviting the wolf in, after the wolf blows out the candle, they feel the tail, feel the fangs, realize that it's not. So what they do is they get the wolf to go out to the ginkgo tree and climb it. And so they get the wolf to let them up into the tree. So they climb the tree, and then they trick the wolf into thinking that it has to climb up into the tree to get the ginkgo nuts, to get all the benefits and medicinal properties of the ginkgos. And so then the wolf climbs into a basket. The kids raise the basket and drop it, and then they raise it again, and then they drop it. And finally they raise it high enough the third time that it kills the wolf. And then they go back inside and they tell the story. So what I thought was interesting about this book is just that, kind of like how our nursery rhymes and all the stories that we kind of grew up as kids is how are we seeing different versions in different countries, and how are those countries, and cultures integrating those stories and using those stories, and yet at the same time we all kind of have these similar stories. And I just thought that was really interesting and is a great conversation to have with students about how we're seeing these values and norms in different cultures, and at the same time it's just Little Red Riding from a different perspective, which is really cool. So that was my book blessing. Sorry it went so long. Hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you in class tomorrow.